And thank everybody for coming. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Lawrence. All the way down on my right is Assemblyman Mark Johns. Next to him is Assemblyman Steve Hawley, and then Kevin Byrne, and then Assemblyman Phil Palmisano. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I know, everybody's busy, and but we really appreciate that you're here and that we can hopefully get some work done this evening. This event is an important step needed to address serious problems with our state's roads, bridges, and water system, as well as to help our Republican caucus to advocate for what is needed to improve our infrastructure with the upcoming session. Teamwork and community involvement are the keys to developing sound public policy. Tonight, we're here to listen to you, to get an idea of the issues you're facing locally. With that, I would like to pass this mic down to the co-host, Assemblyman Mark Johns, who will pass it to each one of the individuals here at the front table.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Assemblyman Mark Johns. I have the honor and privilege of representing the east side of Monroe County. I'm glad that everybody's here tonight. People will be able to watch us on YouTube and other venues. The most important thing to realize right now is that in November, they'll start cobbling together the New York State budget. And we need to make sure that we have equality when it comes to funding. There's a lot of transportation money that goes down to the New York City, Long Island area. They also get billions of dollars more for the MTA, the Metro Transit Authority. And one of the things we're going to cover tonight is making sure that upstate New York has an equal basis in funding with downstate interests. Thank you all again for coming.
Well said, thank you. I'm Steve Hawley. I represent the west side of Monroe County, starting up on Lake Ontario in the town of Hamlin. Then we go down to Clarkson, all the way down to Sweden in the village of Brockport, and then the great town of Riga. The superintendent of highways is here tonight, and the village of Churchville. Our west side needs and wants are sometimes different than urban areas, and just like Mark indicated, we're very, very hopeful that with continued dialogue that we'll see some of the results of monies from the budget shift up to our neck of the woods. Finally, after years and years and over 2,500 signatures delivered to the governor by moi, we were able to get some funding for the Lake Ontario State Parkway, which has been deteriorating for decades. We appreciate all of your work. We see Mark is here from RG, Rochester Regional Transportation Authority. He does a great job, and what they do for us in the rural areas is greatly appreciated. Here's Kevin Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Hawley. My name's Assemblyman Kevin Byrne. I hail from Putnam County, which is the lower Hudson Valley, and represent also a slice of northern Westchester. And I'm co-chairing this task force with my colleague, Assemblyman Palmisano. This is our 5th task force meeting so far. We've been to Binghamton area, Syracuse, spent part of the week over in Long Island, and getting a lot of good feedback from various stakeholders throughout the state. A lot of different things that we've been hearing, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and concerns, is obviously about the financial need to support local infrastructure projects. That's certainly a very big priority of this task force, but also things just to keep in mind as you bring forth your testimony and we ask questions. If there's ways that we can improve upon the application process for some of these programs, the procurement process, and certainly infrastructure has a tremendous importance to our public safety. And if there's any examples that could hinder public safety or if we can improve upon public safety, that's something that I hope you can consider. And I just want to thank you for your time and having the opportunity to be here and to listen to all your concerns. And thank you very much. With that, I'll introduce my colleague who I've been touring the state with, Assemblyman Phil Palmisano.
Good evening, everyone. I just first wanted to say thank you so much for coming out here, and I just want you to know how important your input and how valuable it is to us in this process. As Kevin mentioned, this is our 5th meeting of 8 that we have around the state. It's been very positive already. We've gotten great feedback, great input, great suggestions, pointing out the concerns and things that need to be addressed. I also wanted to say thanks to Assemblyman Lawrence and Assemblyman Johns, for co-hosting the event, and for our friends, Assemblyman Hawley. These three gentlemen are at the forefront of advocating on your behalf in the Rochester region in the Finger Lakes on behalf of transportation needs. And it's been great to work with them. The whole purpose of this task force is to come up with a plan. Once we're done, we're going to put forth a plan from the input and ideas that you gave us. The whole point is to be proactive and not reactive. We don't need to be reacting to a tragedy that happens, a bridge collapse or something like that. We need to be proactive. This is a serious public safety issue. It's an economic development issue. It's a tax issue. This should not be a political issue. This should be bipartisan. I mean, this is quite frankly a common sense issue. When you see the comptroller come out with a report that states that across the state of New York, state and local bridges total $75.4 billion in their bridges are in deficient condition. Out of that $75 billion, $27.4 billion is at the local level. There's a need there, and that's something we're going to be continuing to focus on. Or when CNBC does a study, when they talk about top states for business, and our infrastructure is rated the 7th worst in the entire nation. That's a problem that we need to address. And you being here, your input, your feedback will be very helpful. So we have a list of people that called to register, and once we get through there, you know, if anyone else has something they want to add who's not here, who didn't register, but we want to hear from whoever wants to speak, we are going to try to group, we were looking to try to group some of you guys together, just to come up together, instead of having to call you up individually, but you can still talk about your individual situations. And if you see some other people you want to be grouped with, if we didn't call you, feel free to point and walk up together, that's fine too. So we're going to start right now. Again, we can't thank you enough for your feedback on this. Our first people to testify, we're going to call up Bill Wright, the Commissioner of Public Works of Ontario County, and Brian Young, the Deputy County Administrator of Ontario County.
I think this is a great forum whenever we can have communications between us and our legislators. It's a great thing. You've been very helpful in the past in helping us get through the money we need for CHIPS. It's a program that is vital to all of us on a county and town level. So it's and you've been great in helping us in our advocacy day that we come down. It's our one time when we really come down and try to make sure our case is heard, that it's important that we have the proper funding to go forward. I'll talk about a few things that affect our county, but also probably affect a lot of the guys in the room here. We have a few of our county highway superintendents here, and they can address certain other issues if they would care to do so. The first thing I want to do is talk about, and it's a little bit of minutia, but I think we have to start to get into that. We have to get in the weeds a little bit of how we go forward, particularly in the design process, the way we start a process from when we start at programming and we move forward till we actually put a shovel in the ground. To us, that's a pretty big part of doing a project, and it has its good points and its bad points. And I'm going to pass out a couple things here for you. Yeah, no, it's okay. Plus, yeah, I'm loud enough. So what I got here is sort of the design process that we go through every time we do a project. Now, it doesn't matter whether a project is what we do 95% of the time, which is basically do a replacement. I mean, that's basically, for all of us in the room, we mostly do replacements. That's our bread and butter. We're either replacing a bridge or a culvert. And that's the process that we have to go through. Now, what this shows is the paperwork. On the front, this side is what the paperwork that is developed during a typical project when there's state and federal funding, and on the reverse is that same bridge if I did it myself with local money. So that's a state. I'll show you all. Now, and I think oftentimes we take a hammer or a sledgehammer to everything we do, whether it's a simple replacement project or whether we do something like the diverging diamond that was put in over in Henrietta area. And I think we need to change that. What I'd like to see, I think many of us would like to see a process that's streamlined so that we can probably get a bridge done in probably saving 15 to 20% of the money if we didn't have to go through that elaborate process for the simple bridge replacements, the simple road projects, the things that we do 90% of the time. So if I had one thing that comes out of this, if we somehow can streamline that process, that would be great. What you see, the DOT process that is there, is great for the big projects, the complex projects, but that's not what we do most of the time. So that's something we'd like to proceed and see if we can save $100,000 to $200,000 per bridge project, which would turns into where we could, without asking for any more money, probably 20% more bridges being built if we change the process. Now, some of this is maybe more legislative and may have some parts in the law, but a lot of this is just changes and regulations that have been incremental over the years. And so it is probably born out of mistakes that were made, or just that sometimes as we go forward, we tend to get more process-oriented, and I think we need to change that. The second thing I want to talk about is a little bit about culverts. Culverts, I think, and at least in our county, is probably going to be a big priority going forward. We only have 73 bridges, and they're in pretty good shape. And we've done a lot of work with DOT, a lot of work through our Metropolitan Planning Organization to improve the bridge stock in our areas. And I think that's been a success. I think we are making progress in some of our bridge work. I think most of the counties have seen improvements in their bridge stock. But for instance, I got 73 bridges, I got 1,200 culverts. 350 of them are over 5 foot in diameter or in height. And I have an inventory of every single one of them. 50% of them need significant work. I have a project right now on County Road 1. It's a 6-foot box culvert. It's 35 foot deep in the ground. It's well over 120 feet long, $1.1 million. So culverts alone, I don't have a culvert that I've done in 5 years that has been less than $300,000. So culverts rival the cost of bridges in many cases. And for a lot of us right now, that's the one area that I think we really need to put our money towards. The Bridge New York program, which you have all supported, and which DOT has worked with the county highway superintendents to find a way to make sure that culverts is part of that program. We want that to continue. We want more culvert money. If we can get more culvert money into that program, I think that will go a long way to help the counties as well as the towns. Let's see. The right-of-way process. And again, this is a little more minutia than maybe you're looking for right now, but I think and this has to do with some of the state laws and how right-of-way is processed. If you look on that sheet, you'll see there's an example in this particular bridge example. We spent $12,000 to do all the right-of-way work. We gave the residents, when we paid the actual property owners, paid them $1,600. So we spent $12,000 to give $1,600 to the actual property owners. And that's all in mapping costs. It's all in a process that, again, it's the sledgehammer to everything. We treat buying a piece of right-of-way that's a little strip parcel in the town of Gorham the same way we treat buying an acre of land in Manhattan. So I think there needs to be a way that we streamline processes for, again, what we do all the time, little strip parcels. That's what we're buying. We're not buying acres of land. There might be a process that we need to go through when we're buying big acreage, but we don't do that. Very few of us ever do that. So we need to find a way to streamline that process. You talked a little bit about safety, Intersection safety is a big concern in our county and, of course, across the other counties. The recent accident, I think, in Schoharie County kind of pointed that out. We've done a lot of work in this region and with the support of DOT and the MPO looking at intersection safety. We've built probably more roundabouts and moving in that direction in our counties. And we're going to have 5 of them in Ontario County, and I'm looking to build at least a couple more. They are the best. You want to fix an intersection that has right angle accidents that are proven to be bad actors. They're expensive, but they work. We've decreased over 70% of the accidents in a couple of the roundabouts that we've built. So, intersection safety is a big thing in the rural communities. For some reason, people blow through stop signs. I have no idea what they're looking at, but as you go down some of our intersections, the stop signs get lost in the vastness of the intersection, and people just blow right through. So I think it's a key area that we're looking to work on. I'm hoping that we get some support, maybe even having a program where it's directed straight for intersection safety. And in the rural communities, it's a tough one right now. Almost all, in our counties, we don't have a lot of little brush accidents where somebody's going, a little side fender bender. If we have accidents, it's not pretty. And I think that's what we're trying to fix. Probably the last thing, and it's not about transportation, but it's about wastewater. For many small communities, we built, and Ontario County was the same way, we built the wastewater treatment plant during the construction grants during the 1970s, the big federal program that basically provided 90% funding for our wastewater treatment plants. It was probably one of the best programs for public health, public safety, and development, I think, that was done. We have a lot of communities across the state with good treatment plants. Unfortunately, they're nearing the end of their useful life. My treatment plant was built in 1972, and we're about ready to embark on a $7 million upgrade to that facility. Unfortunately, for many of these small communities, and it's the same in our county, the actual customer base hasn't changed much. We almost have the same number of customers we did 30 years ago that we have today. It's hard to put that cost on the backs of those residents. And it's going to be how we're going to try to finance that is going to be a big issue going forward. There are some grants available, but we need a construction grants program for our water and wastewater plants. We need to find either a partnership between the state and the federal government to bring back a program where it's 90% funded. Maybe we can do a share between the feds and the state and the local to try to find the best way to fund these wastewater treatment plants. Our community is not alone. These plants are all over the state, and we're all in that same situation. And I'd be willing to work with a task force or something to work with our Congress people and try to push a program through to help finance some of the wastewater treatment plants that are really needing some significant work. So those are my points. I've taken up enough of your time. Questions or? Sure.
No, I have one. What percentage? You said most of the bridge work, road work is really just redoing old bridges, right? What percentage, anybody can answer this, are you putting in new bridges anywhere? Is it mostly this reconstruction of the older stock, the older bridges?
It's a mix. We replace a lot of the bridges. We do a lot of bridge maintenance. I think where we need most of the money is when we need to replace a bridge. Most of us can handle the bridge maintenance, even though we do get some state and federal funding for that. I think if we were polled, we would want money for replacements. So I think in our county, we've done a lot of bridge maintenance in the projects in the last probably last 5 years, because our bridge stock is pretty good. I don't know for the other guys, is that fairly? really.
But that's replacement and repairs of an existing bridge.
Right.
We're not building many new bridges.
I would say, like I said, 90 to 95% of what we do every day is just replacements,
Right.
repair, fixing roads where they are, fixing bridges where they are. Is that it?
Right.
We at Wayne County, no new bridges in the last 20 years.
Right.
New alignments.
Right, because anybody that drives down south sees a lot of federal money and state money going into new roads and bridges. And unfortunately, one of the problems we have in upstate New York is 100,000 people are leaving upstate and western New York. And because we lose population, we lose some corresponding money from the federal government. They do a census every year that ends in zero. 2010, we did a census. In 2012, we lost 2 congressional seats, and we're probably going to lose another one in 22. I mean, this may seem off topic, but actually the federal money that comes in is based on the census. So, you know, we need to keep people in upstate New York. That's maybe a different subject, but that money that's coming in or not coming in could be a problem. And in 22, we could get another round of cuts.
I think that's one of the reasons why we're kind of pushing for a streamlined process, because we do so much just simple replacements. It may, you know, down in Putnam County and some other counties downstate, might be a little bit different, but for most of us, it's replacements.
People are leaving New York because of the weather, Mark.
Bill, a couple questions, and for you in the audience too, these questions are for you ahead of time too, so if you want to comment it when you come up, but the issue with the bridges, you know, I've heard that in the past from my county highway superintendent saying that he could do more and wouldn't cost as much. Are these regulations from the, sometimes I understand it has a lot more sometimes to do with federal regulations than when federal dollars come in, but also it was pointed out at one of our forums that it's actually the regulations in the state book. For example, not that anyone wants to look to, one of the issues I heard about that they said, not that anyone's looking to cut back on safety, but the number of inspectors you might need to have on site on a regular basis, that helps drive up the cost from a regulatory perspective. Is it more of the federal side of things or a state side of things or a combination of both?
Well, depending on the funding source, they do have their own regulations they have to follow. In general, if you look at the design manuals that we have to follow, and I didn't bring them with me, I was going to, but I have a bad back and I didn't want to carry them all. But they're probably about this thick. Maine's is that thick. So undoubtedly, some of these regulations that we have are out there, we've put on ourselves. And again, it goes back to some of those processes are okay for big projects. That's, you know, we don't mind doing some of those processes for those big projects. It's that doing it for everyone that I think is the issue. If we could have a process that's streamlined for bridges under $3 million or projects under $3 million, I think that would be 98% of what we do. And I tell you right now, the consultants in the room, they'd rather design bridges than fill out books of design stuff that nobody reads. And the other part of this too, we'll go through all those regulations. I'm building that bridge anyway. I'm fixing that road. No matter whether the regulations make us do this much work or this much work, we're replacing the bridge. You know, and we're replacing it the same way we would have designed it ourselves if we didn't have to go through all the rigmarole.
Bill, on that point, like you said, for a project under $3 million, I mean, are there specific regulations or suggestions you can give to us to say, on a project like this, these are some of the regulations that we would ask you to kind of streamline, or do you have specific suggestions that you can give to us, not necessarily maybe right this minute, but that you could share with us in writing that we can kind of look and evaluate as we try to move forward and when we try to put this plan together? Is that something you or your statewide organization are working in consultation with the towns of Howie?
I have a feeling we would more than be able to do that for you.
I also wanted to get back to the issue of Bridge New York. One of the concerns and complaints that we heard about with the program, and I don't know if all of you have heard this as well, is when the program first came out, it was a one-page application. Now it's a several-page application. It's a lot more complicated. It's a lot more burdensome, especially for when you get in some of the smaller towns, the rural towns, that if they don't have access to an engineer or a consultant to do it, they throw their arms up in the air like, Is that a frustration process that you've seen? Is there any reason why, from your perspective, we couldn't go back to the initial application from your perspective?
So I can answer that. Kevin Rooney from Wayne County. I was a reviewer on both of the rounds, round one and round two of Bridge New York. So I saw the applications. While it is much longer a process in this second round of the application, it yielded much better applications. That being said, I think some of the smaller towns that were still trying to put an application together, they might have reached out to the consultant community here for some help, for some guidance. But as reviewers, there was an awful lot of during the first round applications that absolutely that project had a need, and it was a good project, but it was a terrible application. So it didn't rate well. That project still needed to get done. So maybe the second round that applicant put in again and did a better job with it because the application was a little bit more detailed and it was more, I'll say cumbersome to some, but not to the people that are the professionals that are in this room. You know, we did help a lot of our towns put the applications in because they didn't have the abilities to. We at the county did it for them. And that wasn't a huge effort, but I will say that the second round seemed to yield better applications.
The only other one thing that we found that the second round had to do with making sure we had all the right of way. I think that was required on the second round. That wasn't, and it's hard to know. We haven't even designed the project yet, so sometimes it's hard to know whether we need right of way or not. And they were sort of, unless I got this wrong, it made it difficult because we didn't know. And so they wanted us to kind of verify that we had all the right of way. So I think there were some parts of it that you almost needed a design done in order to make the application. So I think there's some ways to streamline it, but to Kevin's point, I think there was better information. For sure.
So from
And I think we also had better guidance. A lot of round one, we heard of this new program. We, counties and towns, put in these applications, not really knowing the rules. We asked a bunch of questions. We didn't get great answers from the state during that process. But I think they did a better job answering the questions on how the program was going to be run, what was required, things like that in the second round. So I will give them credit that I think the second round was better prepared.
So from your perspective, don't go back to how it started, but maybe you can look to make some possible streamlines to the application from that perspective, or do you think you just leave it the way it is? I mean,
I think there's probably a slight middle ground in there. You know, I wouldn't go all the way back to the one-page application, but maybe there are some efforts, and Bill alluded to some of the things that you kind of need almost a 25% design done when you're putting in these applications.
Okay. I want to talk about the CHIPS program a little bit. One of the concerns that we were hearing as we were traveling around, you know, because obviously there's specific requirements for the CHIPS program. You know, you need to have a 10-year useful life. Where some, especially like some smaller towns said, rural areas said that if there was a little bit more flexibility with those specific requirements, like, you know, I could be able to use maybe chip sealant where I needed it, would help my community, would help me improve a road. Do you see an area to make improvements and provide more flexibility with how the reimbursement works for the CHIPS program and what the qualifications are to be able to qualify and use that money for that type of service?
What do you think? I mean, I've never had any problems with the CHIPS money, but I use it for reconstructions.
Thank you, Don Higgins with Livingston County. The issue with CHIPS, I have no problem with the 10-year life. I think that's reasonable, especially since this is borrowed money. 10-year life allows chip seals, so that's not an issue. If the town or village wants to use it for a chip seal, they can. My concern with CHIPS is that the level of funding is nowhere near enough. The advantage of CHIPS is that every county, town, village, city, highway, or transportation director can choose the projects he wants to do with that money with much less regulation and requirements. So they are able to control the money, and that's the way it should work. we're all professionals. We know our system's the best, and we shouldn't have to rely on someone out in the eastern part of the state deciding what projects we're going to do. So increasing the CHIPS base for us is extremely important.
Thank you, and that's certainly been a priority of our conference, something we've advocated for year after year. The problem we have is trying to get the governor to go along with that, but certainly, you know, your help and the support of the highway superintendents around the state who come up for the Local Roads Matter campaign has been very effective. If you see where we were from a funding level to our local municipalities from just 6 years ago to where they are now with the combination of CHIPS, which we'd like to see that money all rolled into the CHIPS base aid. CHIPS, Pave New York, Extreme Winter Recovery. You know, the funding level for our local municipalities versus where they were 6 years ago is about 50 to 55% more than they were getting, but it's not enough. We understand that. That's always a battle and an issue. One other question on the CHIPS program for you guys. I know there's legislation that we have in our House that would basically allow increase the threshold from $250,000 to $500,000 before you'd have to go out for competitively bidding on a project, would allow you to control that locally. Is that something you think would be helpful, and is that enough, or should it be totally eliminated, or how much higher do you think it should go to? What would be? I mean, it's at $250,000 now. You know, the legislation calls for $500,000. I know worked with the highway superintendents, but is there something on that front that you think would be helpful?
I self-perform a lot of work in our county. I've got crews that can do that. I bump up way above 250, beyond 500 on some of the projects that we do. And getting back to kind of what Bill was talking about with the design manual and some of the hoops you have to jump through with federal jobs, in the last 3 years, I've done 2 bridges with our own staff with a design that was done by a consultant, I will say on the back of a napkin at a very cheap cost. Then we self-performed that work. One was $225,000, the other was $300,000. They'll tell you those are ridiculously low numbers for a bridge at the federal process. There's no way you can get near that. But by using CHIPS monies, we're able to do that, and that's what we think is a better idea than jumping through some of the hoops and spending more money, although it becomes 95% funded at sometimes. I can't do that. I can't stomach that. You know, using that kind of money and spending the money that doesn't need to be spent. So increase the CHIPS. I totally agree with what Don says, is we would love to see the base increased. And then, not just us, I mean, I only have 17% of my roads that are federal aid eligible. Towns, I think your town superintendent, you know, they have none. So they can't even compete for some of those monies that come out of the Genesee Transportation Council, but they can all do work with the CHIPS monies. So that's where they would all, you know, applaud to have more monies there, better control of that. And I know it's not popular with the governor, but that's something that they can all use, and that's why we all advocate for that increase in the base.
Great. One more quick question for you guys too. One of the issues that have come up a lot is creating a CHIPS-like formula for water and sewer infrastructure, because obviously you know that, you know, you put good money, if your water and sewer infrastructure underneath the road is bad, then what good is it having a good road on top? That's been discussed, and another idea is even trying to add, you know, something in there for a CHIPS-like formula to help with the culvert issue. Is that something you think that would be received well by local communities around the state if we were able to do something along that line? Okay. And another question that came up down in Long Island is because of what we're talking about, and when you talk about the dramatic need that there is water and sewer. I mean, we have a $2.5 billion water and sewer fund that was part of the budget, not nearly enough. You know, obviously the dramatic need on the transportation side. Do you think people they should look at possibly the idea of a possible bond act in the future that's voted on by the voters? If it's a bond act where they vote and it's not backdoor borrowing, but it's actually voted on by the voters, if it's something specifically laid out, do you think that's something that's reasonable to look at, to consider in the future as well to help with that need? I'd like to get your input on that as we go along through this process. Even when you come up, that'd be great. So thanks appreciate your input. Sorry it's kind of gone on a little bit, but just wanted to do some important questions, so thank you. All right, we're going to call up this time, I'd like to call up Bill Carpenter, Executive Director of the Rochester Regional Transportation Authority, and James Stack, Executive Director of the Genesee Transportation Council.
Good evening. I'm Jim Stack, the Executive Director of the Genesee Transportation Council. We are the designated metropolitan planning organization for the Rochester area. We deal primarily with federal programs. Excuse me. So every area of the state that's got 50,000 or more people has an office like ours, and anywhere that's dealing highways, bridges, buses, the like, that's using federal transportation funds has an office like ours to develop the transportation improvement program that leads to the statewide transportation improvement program. One thing that we face in our area and most of upstate New York is that we have a very aging infrastructure. And we're dealing with the northeast climate. I just drove in from Buffalo and snow was blowing on 490 and on the thruway. So I just drove in from Buffalo and it was snowing. So part of the challenge is, as was alluded to, we're not building new stuff. And Assemblyman John, to answer your question about bridges, I think you were asking, have we built any new at any new locations? I've been at GTC for over 19 years. We've not built at any new locations. In fact, we are removing bridges in places. So no, we've not built any new. Anything that's been happening out there has been fixing our existing infrastructure. That is our primary focus. We have a strong emphasis in this region on preventive maintenance, and the county highway superintendents, has spoken already, have been very strong partners in that. We look to keep what's good, good, and trying to bring up what's not so good as budgets permit. Another thing we try to take advantage of when we are doing these projects, whether it's rehabilitating a road, replacing a bridge, what have you, we try to look for opportunities to do more of what we call complete streets. What can we do with that facility to make it more conducive to people who either choose to or want to ride a bicycle, opportunities to walk, better serve public transportation. In our long-range transportation plan, we talk about place matters. In different places, you need these different options. But we also recognize you're not going to put a sidewalk on a bridge out in an agricultural area. You don't put it there just to put it there. You put it there where it makes sense. So our focus, like I said, is primarily with the federal stuff, but we do hear from the locals, and it came up already about culverts. We are currently soliciting projects for federal transportation funds, and yesterday I had, unfortunately, to tell the town of Manchester that a project they came in on that's a culvert that is a big need, we can't fund. It's not eligible. This is a project that is just down the street from Red Jacket High School. It is connecting the high school with the park that the students use for their athletics, for their PE. But in order for them to get there, when they get to where this culvert is, there's Jersey barriers squeezing you in from the side. The students have to walk in the road to get there. It's not a busy street, it's a local road, but still they have to walk in the road. So the town comes and says, this is $750,000 to replace this culvert. We are not a wealthy community. We don't have capacity for something like that. And I had to tell them, well, you're on a local road. If it was a bridge, if it was a little bit longer, it was a bridge, you can get federal funds. But it's a culvert, you can't. So the culverts really are a pressing need for local communities.
Well, thanks very much for this task force and identifying the critical need for funding for infrastructure and transportation. As the CEO for the public transit provider for the 8-county area, I'm here really, as so many of you know, public transportation is the infrastructure of access. We need roads and bridges so people in cars can get from where they are to where they want to be. But those without a car, who either choose to live without a car, don't have the financial wherewithal to have a car, or from a health standpoint, no longer should be driving or able to drive, have individuals in the home that can't take a car. We're that infrastructure of access. In New York State, the most significant portion of our operating dollars come from New York State. And as New York State has worked to solve the MTA transit problem, upstate New York has been left behind. Significant dollars are being invested in the downstate MTA area. What we're looking for is fix a transit problem across the state. Rural communities have seniors, people trying to get to work, people trying to get to school. We hear those requests on a regular basis. Funding has been capped under this governor, the 2% cap. And while there's been rare occasions where that cap has been exceeded, the demand is increasing as seniors ask for more, millennials ask for a lifestyle without a car, as those with health issues require access to health care. We just did a great partnership with MCC, one of the other state partners, to allow their students to access public transportation as a fee from the college to us. And we're hearing from parents about the freedom that that allows their students, their children, to not just get to school, but also to access that part-time job, to get to the library, to do the other things in the community. So as you see, roads being converted so active transportation can work. We need investments so that we can participate in that, and local communities provide the mobility options. Not everyone can afford Uber and Lyft, and yet people are saying, what on-demand options does public transit have? When will you be able to provide us the same type of mobility options that we see, whether it's downstate or other communities around the country? What we've had to do is, operating dollars have been constrained, is to take the federal dollars that we get through the MPO, through Genesee Transportation Council, use those federal dollars just to pay mechanics' wages to keep our buses in good shape. And so then we're asking the state for more capital dollars. A lot of the need for capital, and I very much appreciate the Assembly participating in the 5-year capital plan. We're in year 4, next year is year 5, and looking forward to either that continuing or with more robust transportation operating aid, we could use the federal dollars for what they were intended for and be able to provide communities the mobility that they need so their residents can get around on the great roads and bridges that all these highway folks do a great job with. For RTS, it's still $1 a ride.
And isn't that the lowest in the state?
It's the lowest at the state, and certainly the level of poverty that we have in our community, as we talk about it with our board, they very much understand that the discretionary dollars so many people have are limited, and it's a great commitment to have. We do a lot of business partnerships, and the businesses help pay to get employees to their doors, but as they're located further and further away from the urban core, even that's not affordable for the businesses. So there's economic opportunity, there's healthcare opportunity, and just lifestyle opportunity with greater investment.
Right, and with that money coming in, you can keep the rates low. If it doesn't come in, then you have to actually cut service.
Be very hard choices facing us.
Bill, one of the questions down in my area in the southern tier, we've had issues with public transportation with, specifically there was changes to funding, particularly around the area of non-emergency medical travel, where we actually saw some public transportation just stop, and what they were actually funding was taxi cab rides for people, which was costing more and losing the big picture of losing access to that public transportation. Is that, I don't know if you see that as much up here, given you're more of a dense population, but is that something you've heard around the state, especially particularly in rural areas, like I've seen down in the southern tier in some of those regions?
Yeah, thank you, Assemblyman. You know, we serve Wyoming County, Livingston County, the south end of Ontario County, south end of Seneca County. The state hired a statewide broker. That was a requirement of the federal government, but it's not, I don't believe, a requirement of that statewide broker to choose taxi cabs over public transportation. But the local communities lost the ability to direct the Medicaid recipients to use public transportation. So as a result, across the state, we've seen some counties stop doing public transportation at all. We've had areas where people now have a taxi cab to get from home to a healthcare appointment. When they get home, they can't get to a pharmacy, they can't get to the grocery store because there's no regular public transportation. It's a significant unintended consequence, but certainly one we've been dealing with for a long time and should be addressed.
Is this something you believe from your perspective is something the legislature or the governor should go back to the statewide broker saying, because it's really decimated public transportation in some of our rural areas, that's something that could be addressed, and from that perspective would just be allowing them to keep that going, or is this the reimbursement dollar, or what was it specifically?
I don't think it's a simple yes or no answer to a question like that. One of my other roles is president of the statewide New York Public Transit Association. Would be glad to work with you and other legislators like yourself. We hear this all over the state, talking to Senator Helming and Senator Young and their areas. Would be glad to sit down and work with the Department of Health and say, here's what the federal regulations say, here's how they're being applied, can't we find a way to make it work so that the Medicaid recipients, for our seniors, for those that, again, can get to a doctor's appointment but can't get the prescription filled, have all the health care needs that they need, and then the community can really enjoy better public transit.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jen. Next, we're going to kind of pair up some of our town highway commissioners. Kirk Morris from Greece, Jason Kennedy from Barrington, and Jeffrey Benway from Webster.
I hope you don't mind bearing with me. I actually wrote out my comments, and they are going to come across as a bit parochial in nature, but I'm sure that my fellow commissioners or highway superintendents would have, similar stories. Good evening. Again, my name is Kirk Morris. I serve as Commissioner of Public Works here in the town of Greece. On behalf of our town supervisor, Bill Rylick, who previously served as a member of your distinguished body, I'd like to thank the co-chairs of the Assembly Minority Task Force on Critical Infrastructure and Transportation, Assembly members Phil Palmisano and Kevin Byrne, for commissioning the task force and for holding these meetings throughout the state in an effort to gather information and testimony on this extremely important topic. Again, on behalf of Supervisor Rylick, it was our pleasure to work with the task force to host tonight's meeting. I'd also like to thank Assembly members Mark Johns and Steve Hawley for participating in this evening's discussion. I've known and have had the pleasure of working with both Assembly members Johns and Hawley for a number of years, and I commend you both for your service to the residents of Monroe County. I'd especially like to thank our own representative in the State Assembly, Assembly member Peter Lawrence, for his outstanding service on behalf of Greece's residents and all his constituents in the 134th Assembly District. Assemblyman Lawrence has worked tirelessly for our community, providing much-needed resources for numerous projects, as well as fighting for fiscally responsible legislation and state budgets that support the needs of Greece residents. The creation of this task force couldn't come at a better time and is greatly appreciated, not just by those who are responsible for constructing and maintaining the billions of dollars of necessary infrastructure in our communities, but also the millions of residents and employers of New York State who rely on and are served by our roads, bridges, culverts, stormwater, and sanitary sewer facilities. As you are well aware, local municipalities all across New York State are responsible for maintaining a substantial portion of this municipal infrastructure. The town of Greece alone owns and maintains a vast critical infrastructure network, which includes over 900 town roads comprising 264 centerline miles, over 500 miles of sanitary and storm sewers, 31 sanitary sewer pump stations, including a major pump station which uses two 40-horsepower motorized pumps to pump sanitary waste into our mile-long sanitary force main, over 600 miles of sidewalks, 4 bridges, 472 culverts, 9 pedestrian bridges, and 30 stormwater management facilities or detention ponds. Additionally, though not necessarily considered critical infrastructure, the town of Greece maintains 11,000 right-of-way street trees, 12,000 street lights, and a 5-mile-long multi-use pedestrian and bicycle path. Maintaining this infrastructure, along with the other operations of the Department of Public Works, accounts for approximately 37% of the overall town of Greece budget. Greece, like all communities across New York State, suffer from an aging infrastructure and ever-increasing costs associated with the necessary work to ensure that our assets are functioning properly for the safety of our residents and those visiting our community, as well as for the many commercial businesses that provide jobs and goods and services for the people of Greece. I know you've heard these numbers before, but they're certainly worth repeating. Local roads and bridges account for 87% of New York State roads and more than one-half of its bridges. 34% of local bridges are deficient and 48% of road pavements are rated fair or poor and continue to get worse. According to New York State DOT's latest annual highway pavement and bridge condition report, an additional 360 bridges became deficient between 2013 and 2015, and the number of deficient bridges jumped from 5,542 to 5,902. Every single region in the state saw an increase in poorly rated bridges over the past 2 years. The need for additional funding support for our aging infrastructure is indeed great. In the town of Greece alone, 2 major town-owned bridges were flagged as deficient within the span of 2 years, requiring immediate projects to replace these aging structures. In the fall of 2016, the town of Greece contracted with a company to conduct a road condition survey on all town-owned roads in an effort to collect highly technical assessment information. The report showed that 174 of our roads rated below a score of 35 out of 100 or poor, with many more additional roads listed as fair. We are utilizing this data to better target our roads that are in most need of repaving and surface treatment. However, despite annual increases in town funding to support our annual road improvement program, we are unable to make substantial headway. This year, we paved 17 of the 174 severely deteriorated roads. As we prepare to conduct another round of surveying, I'm unfortunately anticipating many more roads will move from the fair rating to poor. Costs for materials compound our challenges, with asphalt prices alone rising almost 25% from previous years. Our storm and sanitary sewer network throughout the town of Greece, which provides sanitary service and stormwater management for our 96,000 residents and 31,000 homes, is also aging and surpassing our ability to conduct necessary repairs or replacement. Portions of our system consist of 60-plus-year-old corrugated metal, cast iron, or clay piping. Maintaining this infrastructure alone is a monumental task. During last year's severe flooding event, due to high lake levels, these systems along our shoreline were impacted even further. Several town roads and the entire storm pipe system sat under and were inundated with water for almost 4 months, further deteriorating this infrastructure and shortening its already stressed life expectancy. Additionally, 13 of the town's 31 sanitary sewer pump stations are located along the Lake Ontario shoreline. 1,509 residential homes are tied into the sanitary system, servicing over 4,500 residents. 10 of these 13 sanitary sewer pump stations servicing shoreline residents ran continuously during the flooding event due to infiltrating groundwater, flooding the sanitary system. Normally, these pumps experience much lower flows and do not run with any regularity. This has resulted in a rapidly shortened life expectancy of these pumps, requiring increased maintenance or complete replacement. Lastly, the town's 60-year-old cast iron, mile-long sanitary sewer force main, which receives sanitary waste from these shoreline pump stations, experienced over a dozen breaks due to the excessive floodwater infiltration, even after floodwaters began to subside. The town was forced to conduct DEC permitted, treated, and controlled bypassing to relieve the stress on the system to prevent its complete failure. Prior to the flooding, inspection showed continued functionality into the future. However, the stress on the system, continued breaks, and the fear of another flooding event caused the immediate replacement of the structure at a cost of $275,000. While these situations are attributable to severe flooding that occurred, they highlight the grave results and negative impacts of an aging infrastructure affected during emergency events. Cost for repairs or replacement aside, highway department crews and first responders are already working 24/7 to assist our residents during emergency events such as snowstorms, windstorms, and flooding, all of which we experienced last year alone. To then have a culvert or bridge collapse or a sanitary sewer system fail stretches manpower and resources even further. Almost a year ago, 2 bridges on New York State Route 18, Ladder Road here in Greece, and within close proximity of each other were posted with 16 and 18 weight tonnage restrictions. Route 18 serves as a major state arterial spanning the eastern and westernmost limits of the town of Greece. Thousands of residential, commercial, municipal, and emergency response vehicles use this road daily. However, these weight restrictions certainly raise concerns about town plow trucks, larger fire trucks, and commercial haul vehicles crossing these bridges. Both myself and the fire chief of the North Greece Fire District submitted detailed information about our heavy vehicles and the need for us to utilize this section of this important corridor. The town of Greece has an annual contract with the New York State Department of Transportation to provide snow and ice services on this road, which is also used by other town plow vehicles to serve numerous neighborhoods in the western portion of Greece. Large fire trucks also must use this corridor to respond quickly to emergencies. Their timely rehabilitation or replacement is critical. Municipal infrastructure supports our residents, our farmers, our schools, our hospitals, our local businesses, our emergency services, mass transit, and interstate commerce. It helps provide jobs and allows our community to maintain their employment. It affects people's lives in countless ways. Recognizing its importance and supporting its maintenance is paramount for a modern society to function and exist. In closing, I'd certainly like to acknowledge and express our appreciation for the funding and support we do receive from state programs including CHIPS, PAVE New York, Emergency Winter Recovery, and Bridge New York. However, as you are well aware, despite the efforts of hundreds of highway superintendents annually lobbying our state government as part of the Local Roads Matter visit to Albany, funding support for these programs, unfortunately, is not keeping up with the dire need local municipalities require. Assemblyman Palmisano, on behalf of all highway superintendents from all across New York State, I want to personally thank you for championing our cause and for the support we receive from our local delegation and the many state senators and assembly members who dedicate their efforts to secure much needed and additional resources. My thanks again to the members of this task force for conducting these events, acknowledging and bringing light to this important issue, and for your continued efforts to help local municipalities continue to provide safe and efficient roads and bridges, as well as other critical infrastructure for the residents, visitors, and employers of New York State. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
I'm Jeff Benway. I'm the Commissioner of Public Works for the town of Webster. Mr. Johns was a town board member, and he serves the town well in his position in the Assembly. There are so many things that Bill talked about, I think that applies to us. I mean, we have a wastewater treatment plant, and we just did phase one, $12 million. We put in for grant funding. Strange thing is, the best way to get grant funding for a wastewater treatment plant is to have a consent order against your wastewater treatment plant, which means you've been operating it poorly, not maintaining it, then you get the money. Unfortunately, we've been maintaining ours. A lot of our equipment is 60 years old. We have a traveling bridge that they don't even make anymore, and we have to scrap our own pieces together to make this thing work, otherwise the clarifiers don't function. Our discharge is right there out in Lake Ontario. Lake Ontario is so important for recreation and fishing, and we can't pick a penny up of money because we didn't do a crappy enough job, basically, apparently. It is. It's sad that you got to mess up to get money, but as far as the money through the agencies down through the state, you know, the towns, we're the bottom feeders. Whatever trickles down from the city and the county, you know, maybe we get to grab a few crumbs here and there. I think some of the money should be designated to towns, especially rural towns and villages. You talked about how tough it is to build a culvert. I got to tell you, there's some culverts of ours that are they're rotting away, but we just don't have the money to go after all of them. My highway superintendent's constantly screaming for more CHIPS money. He goes down to Albany with these guys and talks to the representatives, try to get more funds. And I know everybody asks you guys for money, but I can't think of anything more important than infrastructure. I mean, that's our cars, that's our sewage treatment plants. It's the quality of our water we drink is all dependent on infrastructure. Stormwater program, I'm sure you guys are aware of that. It's a whole new case of, you know, making sure the water's as clean as it can be. We have to go through special ponds now, these bioretention basins. These things are incredibly expensive to maintain. They don't last that long, and the state keeps pushing us to use them. Problem is, how do you pay for it? That's just one big cost. We've got to inspect them, we've got to maintain them, we've got to investigate them, we've got to do reports to the state. I'm telling you, I've been an engineer for 30 years, and I used to tell people, you know, you build things that matter in the community. Now what I tell kids, you fill out a lot of paperwork. That's 90% of my job. Fill out a report, beg for money from somebody. It's discouraging. I'm a past president of APWA, that's American Public Works Association, both at the state level in New York and as well in the Genesee Valley branch, which is right here in the 6 counties around Monroe County. Again, we'd be more than happy to come and talk to you guys and represent the 600 members of APWA throughout New York State. They're constantly wanting to contribute, sit on a committee, help you guys out with whatever issues you think we can. Obviously, there's 2 sides to the program. We want you to give us money, but you guys got to raise the money. Gas tax, it hasn't been touched in years. I know it's a sensitive topic, but if you use the roads, the gas tax makes sense. You're a user. You should pay for the maintenance of it. The ASCE scorecard, I'm sure you guys have seen that. Every level of infrastructure needs money. It's a big challenge. Another problem we've had with some of our federal money and state money is we get the money, we have a 40-man highway superintendent crew that would be glad to build that road. We're not allowed to. It has to be bid out. You talk about competitive bidding where you're paying a 30% premium on the dollar. Why can't our highway guys who are already paid on our dollar, all they need is the materials to get a job done? It's a really simple way to get bridges. I'm telling you, some of these guys from Livingston County, you should see the pictures that we've given them awards for outstanding efforts in doing it yourself. Creative, beautiful structures. These guys, they're the unsung heroes. Nobody knows of these guys, but they're the superstars of APWA. The 2% cap on town taxes, our supervisors is very strong in trying to meet that. But the 2% isn't 2%. It's tying our hands to do more because the governor wants us to stick to 2%, which is sometimes 1%, sometimes 0.75%. We're the guys that are struggling at the bottom end of the funding cycle. So outside of that, the flooding, I hear we had this. We're a coastal town, and I feel his pain. It was a problem. There's a lot of infrastructure that gets damaged every time it gets flooded and freezes. So I could go on forever, but I'll. I'm sure we all, him and I, and all 3 of us agreed that the problem is big, and we would take any help we can get. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Really appreciate you making the trip, and it won't. Hopefully, you'll get out here before it snows and you're trapped here for a week.
I live in the town of Webster as well, but you and the town are doing a great job keeping that plant on Phillips Road running. But what people should understand is that treated effluent is going out into Lake Ontario, and 2 miles downstream from where that effluent is is the water authority intake. And it would be somewhat distasteful to think that we're putting something out in the lake that is, untreated. So it is important, and it's not just because of Webster, but every community that surrounds Lake Ontario, including up in Canada, is dumping effluent into the lake. It has to be clean, has to be sanitary, and that way we get the drinking water that's going to come out, doesn't have to be overly treated. So it's something that, we have to do not only in Webster, Van Lair, every treatment plant has to be putting out. That's why they call it the pure waters, because, we need to make sure that our drinking water, then stuff that we use for irrigation, is pure. And that is a big part of, what I try and push, the environmental standards. So thank you.
On behalf of the Chamber of Commerce for the town of Webster, the discharge is much farther out than the intake line. So I don't want anybody to think that the water is not good. Besides, it's Monroe County water, and they do a wonderful job of filtering it. Thank you.
Jeff Kirk, I just wanted to thank you all again for listing all of these reasons why our infrastructure is such a high priority and highlighting very well whether it's public safety or roads or schools that are using our bridges and roads. But just to kind of follow up on something that my colleague, Mr. John, said earlier, this really, I think, does fall down to priorities. I think our state budget was close to $168 billion this past year, and this is prime for us to be considering in the future. And the dedicated highway, bridge, and trust fund this past year was $3.2 billion. Of that, only about 22% of it was committed to capital spending. So a lot of it goes to debt service and state operations, and I think someone mentioned the gasoline tax. Obviously, there's a lot of different excise taxes in that, and there's the county, and there's the state sales tax, but we get about $520 million, and it goes to the general fund and sales tax revenue bond. So I think those are things that we want to make sure that when we're looking at our priorities for our budget, and we're looking at where the money's going to come from, that's a good place to start. But I just want to, that's something we've been hearing at every task force meeting. Those were some examples, and I want to make sure I just comment that to you as well.
Well, there is that mega lottery. It's up to $900 million. I think if we just cash that in, I think a lot of us are in here, this would be very happy.
I want to also say thank you for what you do. It's a tough job that you guys have, that all of you have. Wanted to kind of talk, I know you mentioned the tax cap. One of the issues came up, obviously we've had some damaging weather, some flooding and things of that nature. If there's proposals out there to exempt from the capital expenditures or storm and disaster type of recovery efforts, would something like that be looked upon favorably and helpful to our municipalities as well? Okay, great.
Absolutely. You say capital spending on infrastructure, all spending? Have it not come for?
No, I would think it'd be talking about like capital expenditure purchases and things of that nature.
Certainly, you're leaving capital project spending.
Good. Capital project spending, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, that's okay. The other issue I want to ask your opinion on to see if you've experienced it. This came up in our hearing at the Southern Tier. The issue of the MWBE, the threshold. The governor has been out there pushing a 30% threshold mandate, which that's almost impossible for some of these rural areas. I know in some of our areas that they had to go either downstate or to even Pennsylvania to meet that threshold. And what it does stop from happening is hiring local labor. Is that something you're experiencing up here or in different areas? Is that a problem for you guys as well? Is that because there's legislation proposed that would kind of mirror that based on the population of your region. So one of our colleagues has legislation that would basically look at the population of the region in that, as it goes to that threshold, and make it mirror more the population of the region rather than just a flat 30%, which it seems has become a challenge for a lot of local areas, particularly in rural areas where we're doing projects. Is that something that you've seen or experienced from your perspective?
A lot of the MWBDB firms eventually get good enough and big enough that they no longer qualify, which is great for them, but now that's a smaller pool that we can go attack, search for some bodies for. Yes, it makes, it's a difficult, 30% is a pretty big chunk to find enough work for them without nitpicking pieces out and make it kind of non-productive.
One of the things that's happened is for the construction inspection part of our projects, where we used to have one construction inspector on the job, we now have two. And part of that second guy is just to take care of making sure we follow requirements, the MBE requirements, we follow all the regulatory things that has been added on in
Great. Terry, go ahead. You had a question or a point? Please. Yes, go ahead. Yep.
Excuse me, your colleague in the Senate, Van Helm, did a whole task force. She did the hearings on MWB.
Right.
And that accounted for the professional services, but as well as the contract. So that's very well attended, very well agency involved with all of that.
Great. No, we would definitely be following up. Thank you for that. And you made a good point about, you know, a successful MWB person who was successful and then was out of the program. So it's penalizing success for individuals who do it as well. We had a similar situation down in Steuben County, Southern Tier as well, that she said, I've had success and they won't let me participate anymore, so it doesn't even count towards that goal. So, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, we're gonna call Lou Tomasetti, Major with Monroe Police Bureau. We hear a lot on our first responders and how infrastructure is affecting our first responders, so we're thankful that you're here and appreciate what you do for our community. So,
hi, good evening, everyone. I must admit I did not come prepared to speak tonight on any issues that we're facing, but more so just to listen to the issues facing everyone else here in the room.
Thank you, Major. Just one question. I know we're talking mainly about the infrastructure needs, but just, I mean, we are the critical infrastructure and transportation task force, and just any comments or maybe concerns that you have maybe regarding transportation and traffic laws. I know in recent years the state passed a move-over law, and that's something that has come up in other task force meetings. If it's being well received, if you feel like people are actually, if there's the awareness is there that people know to move over, if the penalty that's assigned to it makes sense. I know we've had state police continue to get hit even after the implementation of the move over law. I know, and we've also expanded it to include, I think, anyone with flashing lights. So just any comments you have on that, and if there's any other specific challenges that we're facing on the roadways. We did hear also in Long Island a lot of concerns about increasing and distracted driving and texting and driving.
Right, thank you for that. Yes, to answer your question, I think the move over law is being very well received. I could speak on behalf of law enforcement, and I know that we are very appreciative of that effort and that being put in place. I witness it. I drive an unmarked police car. All right, it's a police car, but not many people know it's a police car, right? And I see this on a daily basis. I see traffic slowing down. I said, oh, there must be an accident up ahead, and it's actually someone on a traffic stop, for instance. And cars are actually, traffic is slowing down because people are taking the time to move over. And I see it with tow trucks, even without a police car. There, cars are still moving over when they can, when feasible. So that is very important. It does help us. That was one of the things. I've been in this business now. I'm going on my 28th year. And one of the things I hated most was standing on the side of the expressway with cars zooming by me. It felt like a matter of inches on my back, and it's very nerve-wracking to the point where I started going on the passenger side of cars, at least so, if we're going to get hit, at least I'll have a chance maybe to jump over a guardrail or something. So it's a very dangerous business. So the move-over law is very important. In fact, I stepped out of my patrol car once to help a woman who slid off the roadway into a ditch in a snowstorm on Clover Street, and not 2 seconds after I got back into my car and closed my door, I got hit by someone doing 55 miles per hour and put me in the ditch right behind that person. So like, it is a very dangerous business that, you know, that we're in. So the move over law is very, very important.
Major, you've got 28 years, I had 37, so I kind of empathize with you. But one thing, not one thing, but I mean, you guys are tasked with overload vehicles, inspections, you know, truck inspections, and so forth, which has a direct bearing on the roadways and the safety of the roadways and the conditions and so forth. Do you folks, do you get funding from the state or the federal government for anything along those lines?
For commercial vehicle enforcement?
No, well, yes, you know, for one thing, yes.
No, I don't believe we do.
Do you know if there's anything available?
I'm not aware. I'm not aware of that. It's something I wouldn't mind looking into, though.
Thank you, Major.
Yeah, it's very important. I have 2 commercial vehicle deputies, and I can tell you they can go out on any given day and pretty much find something wrong with almost any truck they see on the road. Any tow truck, there's just so much to be aware of, and it's an education thing. You know, I've got 12 tow truck agencies in the county of Monroe that tow for the sheriff's office, and I send these 2 deputies out, and they do annual inspections on these trucks, and it never fails. They're always, it's very simple to find. Not that they're looking to find something wrong, but it's an education thing, you know, to help these guys stay safe, because they're representing us when they're out there towing vehicles. So and it's very costly too. If you get a ticket, a commercial vehicle ticket, that can be very, very costly.
Do you know if any of that fine money that might be associated with overloaded vehicles or anything along those lines, do you know if any of that fine money becomes available to law enforcement at a later date?
Not to my knowledge, I don't believe it does.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Major.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Wanted to try to call some of our engineers a little bit together, if that's okay. And if I don't call you together, maybe if you think you could partner up. I want to have Terry Rice and Patrick Waterman. Terry's Senior Managing Engineer at Barton and Lejudas, sorry about that. And Patrick's the Director of Business Development at LaBella Associates. And anyone else? Tom Malansky. Hi, Tom. Thanks. Thank you. Yep. And we're definitely going to open this up after we're done here too for those questions. So, but if any of you think you should be up there together, that's fine with us.
I apologize for I was a little bit late. I don't know what happened. Kirk says that I'm getting old. I put together some notes, but it's stuff that you all know. We can just talk about whatever you want to talk about, or I can kind of go through and read through what I did. I gave it all to you. I went through and didn't talk about the needs out there. I was on that side of the aisle for a long time, 32 years with the county, 17 as director, but I'm sure Tim Freeler and Kirk and Bill and Kevin and Don and Dave can kind of tell you what they need on their system now better than I can. But I wanted to kind of go through, and it's stuff certainly that all you know in terms of the money that we have out there that is coming. I mean, and it's always good, whether it's from the municipal, and one of the things that the affiliates, I'll call us, the professional engineers, we're always very supportive of anything that the municipalities can get on CHIPS, and that's why we come down and support them for that, is because whatever they can get on CHIPS, that might be other money that they could either, some of their own money they could use on some of the capital stuff where maybe our firms could get work or whatever to help them out doing designs or inspection. But on the CHIPS end, they haven't had an increase. I don't know, did Bill go through this? Because I wasn't here for you. Okay. So, I mean, the CHIPS, it's, as you well know, but $438 million, haven't had an increase since 2013. Yeah, have gotten other money towards it, but we haven't got really an increase to that base number. The one thing that hits me on CHIPS, and I'm speaking to the choir, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, but $86 million of that 438 goes to New York City, the 5 boroughs, 5 counties down there, the boroughs and the counties. 86 million. Then there's also the extreme winter weather and the paved New York. They get a percentage of that as well. So they get a lot of money down in New York City, and yet all you really hear and all you seem to think they care about or they seem to care about is MTA. And it's the MTA versus the DOT and the upstate versus downstate, yet there's a lot of money going there, and if you talk to the professionals down there, or the transportation engineers down there at the city or whatever, they got to have that money to maintain their system, but yet that's not what anybody, it's only, oh, CHIPS or Pave New York or Bridge New York, oh, that's all going upstate. Not true. Not true at all. And I know the more that you can say and get your fellow Assembly Democrats on board down there, I don't know if they really, it's not an issue to them. Maybe, I don't know, they just think of subways and that's all they think about. I don't know, but they get a lot of the money there too. The Pave New York and Bridge New York, both great programs. Unfortunately, in that 5-year plan, they're both going to end unless they get reintroduced or put a little bit more money to them. The Bridge New York the previous year, not this past year, the year before, for the second bridge, we got an increase of $50 million from the Senate and the Assembly towards that. We're waiting for the Bridge New York, and that's a thing that the professional engineer part of the affiliates, that will helps us. It helps them get bridges and culverts done, but it also helps the engineers get work. They're not really going to get too much work out of the CHIPS. They're going to get stuff out of the Bridge New York. So that's supposedly going to be announced at some time with the bridges and culverts. I will tell you that I think Jim Stack talked about culvert, and I know others have talked about culverts and stuff. There is, and Jeff Benway did as well, there is a lot of culverts out there. In the towns, a lot of the towns don't even submit for it. That's the one thing. So it's the number that you're seeing of people that have submitted for projects and then don't get projects. There's a lot more out there that they won't even submit because the system is, well, we don't have time to do it. They might not have the expertise to do it. If they go to an engineer to have them do it, well, then that engineer, unless they bring them on board at the right time, that engineer can't possibly get the work later from them to do the work. So it's like it's a catch-22, and so a lot of these towns say, well, we won't even submit at all. The other part of the equation on the money is the federal money and the tip money. And the towns, again, where Jeff did go through and say, Jeff Benway talked about on the federal end, they don't get much of that money at all. It usually, for the most part, goes to it can go to any bridge or any highway that's a federal aid highway. That's where you can use that federal tip money. Towns don't have very many federal aid highways. More the urban counties have more federal aid highways than others. So I would say Monroe County, City of Rochester, we used to get, or I get, Tim does now, gets a good amount of, can get a good amount of money just on that end. The more of the other ones that I wouldn't even call necessarily rural counties, but they're going to get bridge money is what they're going to get. The thing that kind of, and I wrote there, you can read, I don't have to go through that, is that whatever happens with the new FAST Act, that's going to end in 2020. Whatever happens with that, whatever happens with the president's transportation plan, if we do ever get one, a lot of what the president is talking about, or what they want, is to kind of put the money in and have public-private partnerships, have toll roads, and have things like that. That's not going to fly up here in upstate New York. I don't see, if they want to go put a toll road on I-490, well, then they're all going to be on the county and the other state roads, or on 590, 390, through whatever you want to say. So if the money comes and it is designated less that the locals have a chance for, and the state gets more, then I think we got to keep a close eye on, and I said this to Senator Robach not too long ago, we got to keep a close eye on, maybe have the state give up some of their other money so that to offset, so we all get a little bit. It's one transportation system. I think that's the one thing. Talked about the 86 million, DOT, MTA, the parity, that they believe they achieved, the equity parity. It sounds like there's a lot of need. I read a lot of stuff. There's a lot of need down in New York City with the subway. I read some of these articles and stuff. And rightfully so, they should have it. Okay, well then, the parity towards the DOT for the roads and bridges and highways and culverts, that's just as important as the subway. So a bunch of these programs are ending. You know, I think the association, as you know, has been asking for an increase of CHIPS. I think that would be a good start, $150 million a year. Get that extreme winter weather, get that into the base. The big thing is to get in the base number. I know you're trying, Phil. I know you guys have all been trying, but get it to the base number, because then the governor takes that number forward. Otherwise, it's a struggle. It's a fight every single year to increase that. So I thank you for your time, what you've done in the past. You've been a strong proponent, all of you, especially you, Phil, and thanks for listening.
Again, Pat Waterman with LaBelle Associates. Real quick, thank you. And first off, thank you all for here, for having these hearings and bringing us together to hear our viewpoint. As been talked about, we are just supporting the county highway superintendents, the state, the towns, in support of advocating for more money. The one caveat, and Terry just said, we're preaching to the choir. We know you're all on board with us. But the one thing to be clear about, the Bridge New York program is a great program. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that's not new money, it's reallocated money. So it's a ability to maybe some Hunger Games type advocacy where they're cherry picking certain projects. Now with the new application, as Kevin noted, there's a little bit more ability to weed out some of the projects that were not the best. So with that, I guess I wanted to just continue to thank you and keep this thing moving.
Thank you.
If I could just add that, and I think you know, but the Bridge New York, the bridge part of it is all federal money. That's just money that comes from the federal government, and the governor grabs, and then gives it back to us. Instead of giving it back to the MPO, where we used to get a lot more money to split up, now it's like he's grabbing it and then gives it back piecemeal as he chooses.
Thank you, Tom Wolanski with GPI. These guys have done a tremendous job of really outlining the issues and how difficult it is on the local individuals and the local communities that don't have the massive populations that downstate has and such. With inflation, the increase in costs of materials and such, and then, as Bill said very well, the additional processes that really don't add that much value or any value to these local projects. The $3 million cap and what was discussed and the potential there would help a lot. But thank you again and appreciate you coming.
Frank Dolan from Bergman Associates, and I don't want to repeat everything that my colleagues have stated here. However, I'm a former county highway superintendent, director of transportation for Monroe County, and I was around when the lockbox was formed, and I was also around when the lockbox key was given out and the box became unlocked. And that principle was a sound one when it was formulated, and then it quickly went away. And, you know, you got to keep that box locked. Those funds that come in from all of us, all of the users of the transportation systems, need to stay in that lockbox for use for transportation projects, whether they be for highways, bridges, culverts, transit. That money is where the taxpayers think it's going. Very few of them know where it's really going. So I echo, bring back that lockbox, put a secret combination on it, let it stay locked. The other thing that has taken place, and I haven't looked at the numbers lately, but you know, while increased funding, they're borrowing money, a lot of that gas tax revenue is not going to get any real projects done on the street. It's paying for debt service, and that's a big problem. I know every one of the counties face that. The more money in your operating budget that goes for debt service is less than any real work that gets done on the streets. So we need to pay attention to that. It's very easy for folks to say, well, we'll give you another $100 million. It's going to be borrowed money in 5 years after you get that. debt service is going to be due, and you're going to be paying for that for the next 20 years, 25 years. And that's bad. That's very bad economics. That needs to be changed, needs to be looked at very carefully. So thank you for holding this hearing.
I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming today and you're sharing your input. And Terry, thanks for helping to get the word out as well. I know you were very helpful with that. One thing I wanted to ask about, I know you, and this has come up in the past, about money that from the federal government is just going to the state, and sometimes they'll go for state interstates and stuff like that, and it's not going to locals like in the past it might have used to happen that way. Is there any recommendations to the federal that you think we can make so that some of that money would be, you know, allocated to the locals at in any capacity? Or obviously it's up to us to really push, because we've had these conversations with the administration about the fact that the state's getting the federal money, they're not giving any additional money to the locals for their work. They just take it and they put it in their plan and say it's our money. Is there anything any other ideas that you guys would suggest on how we could address that? Maybe even at the federal, you know, before the feds do their next plan?
Well, one of the things that kind of was a surprise to us in Region 4, the last tip we went through, and my counterparts will kind of hopefully echo this with me, Bill and Kevin and Don. We found out every other region did this, but the tip money, the federal money that is used, we always think use capital projects. It's kind of like I'll go back to the lockbox and the, you know, dedicated highway bridge trust fund, capital projects. Not all the capital projects, dedicated highway bridge trust fund, some of that money is going to snow and ice on state roads. We've proposed before, I think it's about $700 million a year, I think it is, thereabouts, that goes out of that box and out of the gas tax to pay for that. But on the federal end, that we were totally surprised by, but it was done in every other region. They're using $10 million, and Jim Stack also from GTC can verify this. $10 million over 3 years, just our region, to restripe roads. Maintenance, I wouldn't even call that. That's just operational work to do. And yet the money's being used, because the state didn't have the money themselves, so they're using that. So that's $10 million that could have been used on a highway project or a bridge project or whatever. And we had to then take that out of the tip and says, oh no, this is what we're gonna do. Now, us as a region, we worked very closely with our state DOT, and they were under the gun. They weren't going to get any money. And so it's like we ended up trying to still share the amount of money that we have less, but that was $10 million less money that we had over 3 years, and it's going to happen again, I'm sure. These guys were going through it, and it's going to happen again. So I guess back to your question, maybe have the feds come in the bill and say you can't use it for just strictly restriping a road that's supposed to be done every year or 2 years. Like, you shouldn't be using capital dollars from the dedicated highway bridge trust fund to be doing snow and ice maintenance on a road. It's just the wrong thing to do, especially since, as Frank eloquently said, he was my predecessor, by the way. But he said the money was locked, and now you're going to just pay debt on that money. You're going to be paying that debt for how many years for snow and ice that was done last year, and now it's 10 years later, we're still paying that off.
I mean, you make a good point. I mean, the dedicated bridge and trust highway fund has been a really sore spot with us. You know, I know our colleague Joe Morelli carried the legislation, but it obviously never moved. We offered it as an amendment to the budget at different times that was defeated. But even when you look at it, some of those dollars that go into, that are supposed to, they're going to the dedicated bridge and trust fund. Not all the dollars that are collected in those fees, only a percentage of them are going into that fund. I think across the state, this is numbers from a couple years ago, the state collects about $4.7 billion annually in driver-related fees, whether it's sales tax, whether it's petroleum tax, highway use tax, but only $2 billion of that is actually being used towards dedicated infrastructure, which is just wrong. I mean, that's $2.5 billion more that is being used for other purposes. Like Kevin, my colleague Kevin mentioned, $520 million in sales tax on gasoline is going right into the general fund or used to pay revenue bonds on the sales tax. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's not going where it needs to be used. I mean, those still sales tax on gasoline. I think people expect the money they're paying for driver-related fees, whether registered to fix their infrastructure, and that's the battle we will continue to make. That's not necessarily a money issue. It's just making the changes necessary and make sure it's distributed properly. So.
And you're right. That's what the people think. If I talk to I talk to my mother or my family or whatever like that, and you talk about, well, what do you need more money for? We're paying all this tax. We're paying one of the highest gas taxes of any state, but the money's not going there, and that's where people think it is, and you should be floating with money and flowing in money, and we're not, because it's going elsewhere, and maybe just back to the lock it so you can't go anywhere else. I think things would be much better. You'd have a much more safe and efficient system that would be out there and help economic development. I mean, that's one of the things that's driving us all. That's what we want to do. That's what we'd be helping do, is by helping economic development, by having good roads and bridges, instead of having to close down bridges and have weight limits on them and things like that.
Frank, let me just follow up on some of your points. One of your points there about borrowing. You know, the state right now is very close to its debt borrowing limit. And we're spending billions of dollars a year just in interest. And do you realize that 95% of the debt we have in this state has never been voted on by the public? And these bonds are supposed to be voted on. They're not. So if we had a transportation bond issue, you put it out there. The last one I think we voted on was the Education Bond Act, $2 billion. They're not borrowing the money because we can't afford it. $2, $3 billion, $4 or $5 billion a year in the state budget just going to pay interest on the debt. Think about if we just had $2 or $3 billion of that money to use for infrastructure. So debt is killing us, and we're getting very close to our borrowing limit. You know, we just put up opened up the new Mario Como Tappan Zee Bridge, upwards of $4 billion. Well, we only had $2 billion set aside. The other $2 billion is, oh yeah, throughway tolls are going to be raised across the whole throughway system sometime after everybody gets reelected.
Amen.
Reelected, huh? So 39.6% of the total amount of 3.2 billion goes for debt service. That's 39.6%, the highest for the dedicated Highway and Bridge Trust Fund. The next is state operations at 38.5%, and capital spending is the least at 21.9%. So debt service is killing us. Doesn't matter whether you're an individual, a business, or a state that's not run like a business.
Ditto.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you guys letting us call you up here in groups. That's really helpful in helping us move this along, too. Next, I want to call back up some of our county highway, or three of you. Don Higgins from Livingston County Highway Superintendent, Kevin Rooney, Superintendent from Wayne, and Tim Freeler from our host county of Monroe County. If you gentlemen wouldn't mind coming up here and sharing your thoughts. And Tim, since you're the host county, if you want to start and share your thoughts, and appreciate it very much.
I will do that. Thank you. Tim Freeler, Monroe County Director of Transportation. Thanks to the town of Greece for hosting us, and for you to take the time on this evening to listen to our story, which you have heard over and over again. I have been part of this, the lobbying efforts for many years, visited with you in your offices, and we've talked about the CHIPS, and that's, as Terry mentioned, preaching to the choir. However, I will note, at least for Monroe County and for my counterparts as well, that the CHIPS that we've talked about so often is the bread and butter for the maintenance activities that each of us see, as well as our constituents that we work hard for every day. We deliver it in an efficient manner. I have agreements with 20 towns, and they are my workforce. We buy materials. We work with many vendors as well to provide a lot of those successful projects, but it gets to the roads, it gets to the storm sewers, it gets to whatever needs to be done in an efficient manner. To Bill's point, unlike our federal aid projects, which labor in cost and documents and other things to deliver that similar project, not the same, we can get to those CHIPS projects and get them out on the road and get things done. And we have been very successful in that. I have strived over my tenure with the county to spend every bit of CHIPS money every year. And believe me, that's a challenge, both in climate, workforce, scheduling, weather, you name it. But that's the goal. Unlike some of the federal aid projects, which we labor very hard and takes 2 years for us to deliver, and the results are there, but not nearly of the magnitude of what we can accomplish with that chip. So I will speak to that first. Secondly, you talked about some of the MWBE, and you wanted to hear some feedback on that. As Terry mentioned, that comes both on the professional services side as well as the construction side. The construction side of it is particularly a challenge when you have projects that go out for competitive bid. People are trying to put a good number to that project. They have relationships with some of their subcontractors and others that they rely on to deliver at that price. And they need to have quality of work, because if it's rejected, you can't make money if you're doing it twice. And when those vendors and subcontractors are unavailable, overloaded, inexperienced, or unavailable, that really puts a crimp in the project delivery. The quality of work that's done, they can't do it, and that becomes a major problem for both the municipality who's trying to deliver that project as well as the contractor who's trying to make a few bucks and live another day and bid on another project next year. And the availability of those working folks that can deliver the flat, the concrete, the other things is limited. And every day I think there's a few less. Not because they haven't maybe tried hard, but the skill sets are dwindling, and it's become a real hardship. I think I'll let the rural county speak to their vendors that they work with, but a lot of our guys are looking far and wide, and they may be coming from Buffalo to do some work in Rochester, just because that's the best guy around, and he can deliver time and get it done right. So. On the money side, yeah, we have a distribution problem. That CHIPS formula that you mentioned earlier, as I know Terry left behind in his file drawers, and I still have it, the breakdown, and can speak very close to that. There's very few people in the state that understand that it's a very convoluted formula, but it's the best we got at this point, and if we get more money and use that formula, so be it. There's certainly an opportunity for improvement there. What that formula is, I won't speak to that right now because I don't have one, but the distribution of that, both to New York City, the towns and the villages, my counterparts at the towns, we see an increase in CHIPS, but their numbers are pretty small, and as a result, their opportunities to do much with that are limited. So that in and of itself is probably more of a task than finding the money, but changing that formula losing sight of that should not be forgotten. So we will continue with my counterparts here at the town of Monroe County, and as Kirk and Dave and others here have spoken to, deliver on that CHIPS side. We'll give you a good bang for your buck and deliver on that with the least amount of pain and agony on our end, but we'll give you a good product. And yeah, it'll last 10 years. We'll sign the certifications. We don't have a problem with that. And we'll continue to move forward and maintain the infrastructure. A lot of what you see is what you see, but there's a lot of what you don't see is what's really the underlying problems, as people have mentioned with culverts and other things. Yeah, it's easy to drive over it, but until it's a 5-footer and it collapses, then, oh, I never knew it was there. They can see the roads. Those don't usually collapse unless there's something hollow underneath, and that's often what happens. But we're doing our best to keep it together, and we'll put that money where it needs to be.
Thank you. You heard some of my comments earlier where I piped in, but one of the things I want to echo with Bill Wright, he talked about culverts are our next problem. They really are. And the Bridge New York program, I think, is a good program because it let the locals get some of that money. Again, it was a rebranded program. It was called something else before, so it's not new money. But the culvert portion of that, I was a benefactor of getting a culvert project in round one. We actually self-performed it. a small amount of money. And it went fairly well. I think the process was a little bit easier than if it was a federally funded bridge project through the Bridge New York program. So I'm kind of, I'm impressed with the program. I would like to see more money in the culvert portion of it. And if that was the case, I think some of the towns could benefit more from that as well. Most of the towns don't own bridges, so they can't compete for that money. They do own culverts, but they're afraid of the process, you know, and like I said, in our county, we helped them out with it, and we will help them out if they're successful in getting a project awarded to them, because we work very well with the towns. But that's something that I think that they can benefit from. And again, certainly the chips, because everybody can use chips and they can use it at their discretion, and you know, they can find ways to use it and make it a 10-year life on the project or the element that they choose to improve. That being said, one of the other things that just kind of struck me here was the discussion of the state's up against its borrowing limits that somebody, John, had said. If that's the case, and there's no new money, there's no new printing money, let's do what Bill said, let's fix the process. Let's make it simpler for us. Let's not spend money, you know, reading through the volumes of binders here that we have, you know, that we have to follow. Make it simpler for us, and we'll stretch the money that we do have if there's no new money. So I guess with that, that's all I have.
Don Higgins, Livingston County. I want to echo our thanks to all of you for coming up here tonight, as well as your other sessions across the state, and for all your past support of transportation funding issues. I also want to repeat and echo the issue about culverts. I fully agree with my cohorts here that culverts are becoming the biggest problem we have. The large culverts, anything over 5 feet in diameter, and that we say 5 feet, over 5 feet in diameter, but it goes up to 20 feet in diameter or length, because a bridge officially, technically, is anything over 20 feet. So anything under 20 feet in span is a culvert. So it's not just 5-footers. It could be a 10-footer, 15-footer, so on. And they are very expensive to replace. To get federal funding for a culvert replacement, it has to be on a federal aid eligible road, which most of us rural counties don't have any. In Livingston County, we have 4 of our many county roads that are federal aid eligible, and most towns and rural counties have very little, if any, federal aid roads, so they can't get money to replace culverts. So the Bridge New York program helps, but the biggest program to help is CHIPS, because any town, village, county, city can utilize that money to replace a culvert and to do any other project that they deem is necessary, not the state or someone over in the eastern part of the state on a committee. Each professional in that town, village, city can make their own decisions on how to use the money. One other issue I want to touch on that hasn't been mentioned, and this goes with culvert projects. It's another unfunded mandate for us regarding the DEC and Army Corps regulations that are getting more intrusive on the design of the culvert and the size of the culvert that has to be replaced. We could have a 10-foot culvert that is performed fine without any historic flooding or anything like that. But when we go to replace it, between the DEC and Army Corps regulations, we have to put in a much larger culvert, either because if it's a 4-sided concrete box, it has to be buried 1.5 to 2 feet under the stream to make sure there's a gravel stream base, which of course adds to the cost of that structure. And in many cases, we have to put in a wider structure because they're now requiring us to meet the dimensions of the stream banks rather than the size of the culvert that was there. So there are a lot of unfunded mandates that are increasing the cost of these culvert structures. So culverts are a big issue. Thank you again.
Just one quick point. Kevin, I know I brought up with you about the Bridge in New York application, and you said there was probably some ways you could tweak it a little bit. I'd certainly be interested in your recommendations on how things we might be able to do in that area that might make it a little bit easier for some of our other municipalities that have been having a hard time or are frustrated with it, you know, in the future. And it doesn't have to be right now, even if something you can send to us in the future.
For sure. Yep.
And then certainly as an industry, as a group, as a whole, and certainly working with your associations, if there's suggestions on how to make the CHIPS formula better, we'd like to hear it. Believe me, down in Long Island, they had their suggestions that they thought it should be more population-based. Yeah, imagine that. I was sat very quietly for that and just let them talk because we're there to listen. But yes, I thought that was an interesting point. Hey.
Part of it is got, part of the formula does have fewer miles traveled.
Right.
Unfortunately, the volumes are from the early 1980s. And it's based on where who's really getting hurt. And I'm not trying to hit on the city or anything, but more of the population has moved out to the suburbs. Towns are getting less money than they really should. And cities are getting continually more money than they should. If they updated the formula. That formula it's complicated, it's tough. There's ones that they want to do right. They want to get on. I don't know about lane miles. But that's another part of the formula. And the state does not consider a two-way left turn lane or a left turn pocket as part of the road that should be counted as mileage for CHIPS.
I remember talking to Bruce about that.
We always have considered it that, but some towns haven't, and we haven't. If they change that formula so it's not included, I think we figured out it was like $700,000 we lose.
Yep. It's amazing. Any other questions?
Just one other thing I wanted to emphasize is that the bidding limit from 250 to 500,000, that would be extremely helpful. It's not going to take any work away from the contractors, but it simply allows us to do the work we've been doing in-house without fearing a project being unfunded. And I'll give you an example. With that $250,000 limit, if we have a road project and the total cost is $300,000, we can't even legally, technically, put our own flag people out on that project. Because if we do, then that technically disqualifies that project for funding because it's over the $250,000 limit and the whole thing was not bid out. So nobody's been hit, I don't think, by that. But the potential there is for an audit to find out that we put 4 or 5 of our flag people on a project that cost over $300,000. So that legislation is very important.
And where does that legislation stand right now? Can you tell?
It's still in committee, but we're working on it. Actually, actually had a conversation with my colleague in the majority, Donna Lepardo, about it near the end of session. She seemed to express some interest in it as well.
That's great.
Which would be a good thing if she was considered to pick that up, I think. And so we're going to continue to have discussions on that, and be reaching out to her at the beginning of the year about that as well.
Good. Thank you.
So.
Is it worth trying to push it to $1 million, or do you think get 500,000, but if you think we'll just walk away?
You guys tell me.
I'd be happy with the 500,000, but I've figured out some ways to circumvent it.
Rewind the tape. Rewind the tape.
And I think that's exactly what we don't want to do. You don't want to build a project around the budget. You want to build a project of what needs to be done. And and I'll speak in Monroe County, we have a lot of roads, obviously. These folks have a lot of longer roads that you don't want to stop in the middle and make it a 2-year job when in fact the economies of scale, let's keep on going and let's get this done, and it exceeds the 250 and it becomes a problem for no good reason. The need is still there, and we're up against this artificial cap that's really accomplishing nothing other than, I'm not sure what it's accomplishing other than a budget restriction, so.
That's exactly what has to happen, is you segment the project that maybe could have been done with the economy of scales in one big long shot. Instead, you're doing it block to block.
We can certainly have conversations and continue further conversations as we get into this session next year. So, thank you. So we're going to call up our last 2 people in one group, and then after they finish, if anyone who wasn't registered or didn't, we didn't have you on the list, we want to welcome you to come up and speak. We really appreciate your input. We appreciate your patience. So thank you very much, gentlemen. And next, I want to call up Mark Lessner, the Director of Bridge Design with Popley Design Group, and Daniel Roop, Manager of Construction Services for Ravi Engineering and Land Surveying.
Neither of us really realized we had to speak.
We won't take any of your time unless you have something. You good?
Well, I guess I just wanted to echo what everybody else said here. I think Bill Wright did a great job. He hit the nail on the head. Paperwork has really become out of control on these projects, and it's a real inefficiency in building projects. We spend a lot of money on bureaucracy. We lose a lot of time. And what I'd like to see as a taxpayer is I'd like to see my tax dollars going to work on steel, concrete, asphalt, and not on paperwork. And I think Bill said it as well. As engineers, we go to school to build things. We don't go to do paperwork. So that's all I really have to say. Dan?
I'm good. Thank you, guys.
Do you have any questions for us at all, or? Okay, well, thank you for doing
We'll always welcome if there's ideas or suggestions you have along the way, please take the time, even if it's not here, write to us, write to our offices, write to our public affairs group that helped put this together. We want to hear as we keep going along your input on these things, so thank you very much. Is there anyone who might have not have registered that would like to come up and talk and share your thoughts? We'd love to have you come up now. Or forever hold your peace. I'm going to let my colleagues wrap it up here in a minute. I just wanted to say, again, though, thank you so very much for coming up. I can't tell you enough how important and valuable your input, your discussion, your ideas and suggestions. We want to hear from you along the way. And again, we're going to take these ideas, these thoughts you share with us, and put it together in a plan and in a report. And we're going to share that with the governor and our legislative leaders, and then we'll have that report available for you and the public as well, for your industry groups, or if anyone wants it. If you keep in touch with us, we'd be happy to share that with you as well. So, but that's the basis of that report is going to be the feedback we heard here tonight, and we continue here around the state. So I can't thank you enough for being here and coming out. And with that, I'll pass it over to the co-hosts and our guests for holding this for us tonight. So.
Yes, I don't have a lot to say. One thing I would like to say is thank you for taking your time this evening. We know your time is important, but it was very important for me to sit here and to listen to you folks and to hear what your concerns are. It gives me a lot of information that I normally wouldn't have, and it's knowledge that really I didn't have. You guys have touched on an awful lot of things, and I'm sure that it's going to be in the report that Assemblyman Palmisano and Byrne are going to make. But things such as how important CHIPS is and parity and the lockbox, Frank. A lot of those things are something that the normal person doesn't think of. As I was speaking with the major, when I sit down in the assembly, I listen to law enforcement items, public safety items. Something like this. A lot of times you're really not aware of until something crawls up to you and smacks you in the side of the head, and that's pretty much what you guys have done for me tonight. So Thank you, I appreciate it, and again, thank you for your time and your input.
Mr. Wright, I just want to be very brief and just say thank you all. As my colleague, Mr. Palmisano, said, this will obviously be included in our final report that we will share with our colleagues and the governor. And we can't do this without listening to you all and listening to the experts in the industry, the boots on the ground. So I just want to say thank you for your time, and thank you to Mr. Johns for calling it Tappan Zee.
$4.2 billion. Is the middle initial in there? Have they put the sign up yet?
Yeah, they did.
They did. 4.2 billion there, and how much do we get in terms of scraps? 100,000 here and 100,000 there. That's what each and every one of us do every day that we represent upstate, and Westchester County is in New York City. They don't consider Westchester part of New York City, so we accept you as one of our friends.
Hey, Putnam is a very rural spot.
And Putnam as well. We continue to fight, and that's all we can do as upstate folks, whether we're Democrats or Republicans. We try to do the best we can for our folks. We're New York too, and we have a lot of roads, a lot of bridges, and a lot of folks who pay a lot of taxes, and we continue to fight on your behalf. Thanks to Phil and to Kevin. They've done a great job so far. They're going to continue with another couple task force meetings. We'll get that task force report out to all of you, and let there be more chips next year. Mark Johns.
Yeah, once again, I want to thank all my colleagues, Assemblyman Lawrence, for opening up the town hall for us. You know, next year the budget is due on April 1st again. I would just suggest that possibly, and I've never voted for a tax increase in my life, but possibly I've heard enough tonight about a fuel tax, a gas tax, and I think, as Frank, you said, let's put it in a lockbox. You can hide a lot of things in that budget. It's stacked pretty high. And maybe something like that, with the fact that, you know, gas can vary 50 cents up, 50 cents down. Maybe no one would even miss 5 cents a gallon either way. Get a car wash, you're going to save 10 cents anyway, right? So, so the gas tax, maybe we can put that money aside and do something with roads and bridges if it's dedicated. And you know, there's something else coming up in New York City. The Mayor de Blasio has talked about in City Council about congestion pricing. A lot of times they cobbled together deals. I mean, the tax cap was cobbled together with rent control. Believe it or not, the most important issue in New York City is rent control. Who would think that up here, right? Up here, it's roads and bridges. So, you know, maybe there can be something stuck in the budget and quietly it passes through, and maybe we'll all be better off for it. So thank you all for coming.